So there's this woman, let's call her Mrs. Smith for now. You know the type. Lives in a big old house, looks like she's got it all together, but underneath? Yeah, things ain't as shiny as they seem. You see, Mrs. Smith is a real go-getter. Grew up rough on the south side of Chicago, where dreams are free but the rent sure as hell ain't. She watched her mom scrub floors and clean other people's shit to put food on the table. You know, the American dream, right? Anyway, Mrs. Smith dragged herself out of that life, clawed her way up, and somehow, don't ask me how, she ended up running one of the biggest cleaning companies in the damn country. Pure Clean Inc. Sounds fancy, right? Yeah, except Mrs. Smith never forgot where she came from. She made sure her employees got fair pay, good benefits, all that kumbaya corporate BS, but deep down she always wondered, were her employees really who they claimed to be? I mean, let's face it, you can't make it in America without a little paranoia. So one day, Mrs. Smith is sitting in her massive kitchen, sipping her overpriced coffee, scrolling through her emails when she spots a complaint. Some rich jerk whining about how one of her cleaners stole money from them. Now, Mrs. Smith's first thought is, yeah, right, Karen, you probably lost it yourself. But something about this one rubs her the wrong way. It's not the first time she's heard this kind of complaint. She leans back in her chair, staring at the screen. The old neighborhood taught her one thing: trust, but verify. So Mrs. Smith decides to put her own employees to the test. And what better way to do that than to go undercover as a regular, everyday customer? Yeah, that's right. She's going to be the mystery client for her own damn company. Bold move, right? She sets up the appointment online, using the name Mrs. Linda Thompson. And let me tell you, she went all out with the fake persona. Tacky floral blouse, hair in a messy bun, and the kind of cheap jewelry that turns your skin green. You know, the stuff that screams, I watch reality TV for fun. She books a deep cleaning session for her own damn house and leaves a few strategic traps around. Cash here, jewelry there, just enough to tempt a thief but not enough to make it obvious. And if you're thinking, this lady's gone crazy, well, you're not wrong. Now, the day of the appointment arrives and Mrs. Smith is pacing around her living room, feeling like an actor before opening night. She's even got a crumpled up magazine she plans to pretend to read, just to sell the whole housewife act. And that's when the doorbell rings. She opens the door to find a woman standing there, mid-40s, a little rough around the edges but with a smile so sweet it could rot your teeth. This is Linda, the cleaner assigned to her house. Linda looks around the place, her eyes widening a bit at the sheer size of it. Nice place, she says, her voice all sugary polite. Mrs. Smith forces a smile. Thanks, I try to keep it clean, but you know how it is. Life gets busy. Linda nods. Don't I know it? Let's get started, shall we? As Linda moves through the house, dusting and wiping down surfaces, Mrs. Smith watches her like a hawk. Every movement, every glance. At first, it's all business as usual, but then things start getting weird. Mrs. Smith notices that Linda lingers a little too long in the master bedroom. She hears drawers opening, little rustling sounds that sure as hell don't sound like cleaning. Her pulse starts to race. She's got a hidden camera in there, of course, but still, being here in person makes it all the more real. Like she's watching a slow-motion car wreck. After about an hour, Linda comes back downstairs, smiling that same sweet smile. All done, she says. You want me to take the trash out? Mrs. Smith's lips curl into a smile that's a little too tight. No, that's all right. I'll take care of it. Linda leaves, and Mrs. Smith waits until she's out of sight before racing upstairs. Sure enough, the envelope of cash she'd left in her dresser, gone. Just like that. And you know what? Mrs. Smith doesn't feel angry. Not yet. She feels something else. Like the first shiver before a storm. She picks up her phone, pulls up the footage, and there it is. Clear as day. Linda rummaging through the drawer, pocketing the money like it's no big deal. Mrs. Smith feels a cold smile spread across her face. Well, 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 she whispers. Looks like it's time to clean house. But she's not about to call the cops or write an angry email. No, Mrs. Smith's got bigger plans. And if Linda thought she was getting away with this, she's about to find out she just stole from the wrong woman. Alright, so Mrs. Smith, remember that's just her undercover name for now, is sitting in her living room, staring at that video of Linda swiping her cash like it's the most casual thing in the world. It's the kind of shit that makes you want to throw your phone across the room. But Mrs. Smith ain't the type to lose her cool. No, she's got a different plan. She picks up her phone and dials a number. Hey, I need a favor, she says, her voice all ice and steel. Yeah, I'll owe you one. Meet me at the office in an hour. Now, Mrs. Smith's office isn't just some corporate bullshit HQ with sterile walls and fake smiles. It's her domain. She built this place brick by brick, and every single person in that building knows better than to cross her. So when she storms in, heels clicking like gunshots, people start to scatter. They know that look, the someone's about to get their ass kicked look. She heads straight for the security room where her head of security, Marcus, is waiting. Marcus is this big dude who looks like he eats cinder blocks for breakfast. Not someone you'd want to piss off on a good day, let alone today. "All right, Marcus," she says, slamming her bag on the desk. "Pull up everything we've got on Linda. I want to know if this is her first rodeo or if she's been helping herself to other people's shit for a while." Marcus raises an eyebrow. "You serious, boss? You think she's been stealing?" Mrs. Smith leans in close, her eyes narrowed. "I don't think, Marcus. I know. Now do what I pay you for and dig up the dirt." 10 minutes later, Marcus has a folder on Linda thick enough to use as a doorstop. Turns out our sweet little cleaner has a bit of a track record. Complaints swept under the rug, cash missing here and there, jewelry gone without a trace. And somehow, every single one of those complaints got buried so deep you'd need a damn shovel to find them. Mrs. Smith's lips curl into a dangerous smile. Looks like Linda's been treating this company like her personal piggy bank. Marcus cracks his knuckles. "Want me to take care of it? Give her a little persuasion?" Mrs. Smith chuckles, shaking her head. "Nah, we're not breaking kneecaps today. I've got a better idea. We're going to let Linda dig her own grave." So Mrs. Smith sets a little trap. She schedules another cleaning for Mrs. Thompson's house. But this time she makes it extra tempting. She leaves a diamond bracelet out on the dresser, something shiny enough to make even the most honest person pause. The next day, Linda shows up like clockwork, all smiles and fake cheeriness. Mrs. Smith watches from her hidden camera as Linda's eyes zero in on that bracelet like a raccoon, spotting a trash can. She doesn't even hesitate, just pockets it like it's no big deal. Bold as hell, right? But Mrs. Smith isn't about to let this play out quietly. Oh no. She wants Linda to sweat. She wants her to feel the walls closing in. Once Linda's finished and tries to make her graceful exit, Mrs. Smith steps out from the kitchen, blocking her path. "You know, Linda, I just realized I can't find my diamond bracelet. You wouldn't have seen it, would you?" Linda's face goes pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. No, ma'am. I didn't see anything like that." Mrs. Smith's smile is colder than January. "You sure? Because I could have sworn it was right there on the dresser before you started cleaning." Linda's eyes dart around, desperate for an escape route. "Maybe it fell? I could help you look for it." Mrs. Smith crosses her arms, leaning against the wall. "Don't bother. I think I know exactly where it is." There's a beat of silence so thick you could cut it with a knife. Linda's hands are shaking now, and Mrs. Smith can practically see the gears turning in her head. "You know, Linda," Mrs. Smith continues, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "it must be real hard work, cleaning houses all day. I bet it's tempting to take a little bonus every now and then. But here's the thing. I hate liars and thieves, and right now I'm looking at both." Linda's voice cracks. "I swear I didn't take it." Mrs. Smith cuts her off, holding up her phone. "Save it. I've got footage of you slipping that bracelet into your pocket. So you've got two options. You come clean or I make one phone call and the cops will be here faster than you can say, 'Grand larceny.'" Linda's shoulders slump, all that fake cheeriness draining out of her like water down a sink. Okay, I took it. I'm sorry. I needed the money. My rent's overdue and my kid's sick. I didn't know what else to do." Mrs. Smith lets out a harsh laugh. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me. The poor me sob story? You think that's going to work on me? I've seen tougher times than you could imagine, lady. And I didn't solve my problems by stealing from people who trusted me." She steps back, letting Linda stew in her own panic for a few agonizing seconds. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to hand over everything you stole, and then you're going to sit tight while I decide what to do with you." Linda nods frantically, digging the bracelet out of her pocket and holding it out like a peace offering. "I'm really sorry. It won't happen again, I swear." Mrs. Smith snatches the bracelet and stares Linda down, her eyes colder than ice. "Damn right it won't, because I'm about to make an example out of you." But Mrs. Smith isn't done yet. Oh no, this is just the beginning, and Linda has no idea how deep the shit she's in really goes. So here's the thing. Mrs. Smith could have just called the cops right then and there, let Linda get hauled off in cuffs and washed her hands of the whole damn mess. But that would have been too easy. And Mrs. Smith? She doesn't do easy. She wants to know how deep this rabbit hole goes. The next day, she calls a meeting with Marcus, the human tank she calls head of security, and her top HR guy, Greg. Now, Greg's the kind of dude who wears bow ties unironically and talks like he's still in a college debate club. Basically, he's a pain in the ass, but he gets shit done. "All right, boys," Mrs. Smith says, pacing like a caged lion. We've got ourselves a little infestation problem. Turns out Linda's been helping herself to more than just a paycheck. And I have a strong feeling she's not the only one. Greg adjusts his ridiculous bow tie. You think there's a larger issue here? Mrs. Smith gives him a look so sharp it could cut glass. No, Greg, I just like wasting my time on small fries. Yes, I think there's a larger issue. What the hell do you think? Marcus grins like a wolf who just caught the scent of blood. So what's the play, boss? Mrs. Smith leans forward, eyes glinting. We're gonna set a trap. We're gonna dangle a big, shiny bait and see who bites. And when we catch them, we're gonna squeeze them until they spill their guts about everyone involved. Greg shifts uncomfortably. Are you sure that's the best way to handle this? It sounds aggressive. Mrs. Smith lets out a cold laugh. Greg, honey, if you think this is aggressive, you're in the wrong damn job. Now either you're with me or you're in my way. So what's it gonna be? Greg swallows hard. I'm with you. Damn right you are, Mrs. Smith says, leaning back in her chair. Now here's what we're gonna do. Fast forward a couple of days, and Mrs. Smith's set up her bait, a big fat job at one of their highest-paying clients. A mansion out in the fancy part of town, the kind of place where the air smells like old money and privilege. She sends Linda out on the job, but she's not going alone. Mrs. Smith has assigned 2 other employees, Samantha and Mike, to join her. Mrs. Smith's got eyes on the whole operation. Cameras hidden in the house, audio mics, the works. She's not just watching, she's waiting. And sure enough, not even an hour in, Linda starts whispering to Samantha about how there's no way this old rich bastard's gonna miss a couple of trinkets. Mrs. Smith watches the screen, her lips curling into a slow, dangerous smile. Gotcha, you sneaky little shit. Mike looks hesitant, like he's got half a conscience left, but Samantha's nodding along, eyes gleaming with greed. Mrs. Smith leans back, feeling the satisfaction of a predator watching its prey walk right into a trap. An hour later, Linda, Samantha, and Mike leave the mansion acting like they've just completed an honest day's work. But Mrs. Smith knows better. She's already sent Marcus and Greg to confront them, before they can even make it back to the office. The 3 employees walk into the conference room like they're just there for a routine meeting. But the second they see Mrs. Smith and Marcus standing there, they freeze. Linda's face goes pale. Samantha's eyes widen, and Mike starts sweating like he's in a damn sauna. Have a seat, Mrs. Smith says, her voice calm but deadly. We've got a lot to talk about. They all sit down, looking like kids caught stealing cookies before dinner. Mrs. Smith lets the silence stretch out, just to make them squirm a little. So, she begins, tapping her fingers on the table, who wants to tell me why I just watched a live feed of you 3 trying to rob one of our clients? Linda opens her mouth, but no sound comes out. Samantha's lips press into a thin line, and Mike looks like he might puke. Nothing to say? Mrs. Smith leans forward, her gaze like a laser. All right then, let's make this simple. You're all fired, but before I call the police, I'd like to know how long this little operation's been going on, because I have a feeling this wasn't your first time. Linda's voice comes out weak and shaky. It started a few months ago. Just a few things here and there. Samantha said it was no big deal, that everyone does it. Samantha whirls on her. Oh, shut up, Linda. Like you weren't all in on it too. Mrs. Smith holds up a hand. Enough. Here's the deal. You give me names, every single person involved, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you walk out of here without a pair of handcuffs. But if you lie to me, I'll make sure you spend the next 10 years wondering what fresh hell prison has in store for you. Understood? They nod, each one of them looking like they're about to break down. One by one, they start spilling names. Janet in accounting, Derek in supply chain, even Greg's assistant, who's been doctoring invoices. It's a whole damn web of corruption, and Mrs. Smith's right in the middle of it, tearing it apart thread by thread. By the time they finish, Mrs. Smith's got a list of names so long it looks like a phone book. She leans back in her chair, feeling the weight of it all sink in. You 3 are done here, she says coldly. Get out of my sight and don't think I won't be watching. As they slink out of the room, Mrs. Smith exchanges a look with Marcus and Greg. This company's got a rot in it, she says, Aaron, but we're going to burn it out, and we're going to make sure it never ever happens again. Greg shifts nervously. So, what's next? Mrs. Smith's smile is pure steel. Oh, Greg, we're just getting started. Mrs. Smith isn't one to let things slide. She's a shark, and now that she smells blood in the water, she's ready to go full jaws on these fools. She's got a list of names, a company infected with corruption, and a burning need to clean house, literally and figuratively. First thing she does, she calls an emergency meeting with all department heads. The room's filled with nervous faces, and you can feel the tension thick enough to cut with a rusty knife. Mrs. Smith walks in like a storm, her eyes flashing with that "don't mess with me" energy. "All right, listen up," she says, her voice cold and sharp. "Some of you have been treating this company like it's your personal piggy bank. You've been stealing, lying, and covering for each other. Well, guess what? Your little gravy train just got derailed." Greg looks like he's going to pass out, but Marcus stands behind her, arms crossed like a human wall of intimidation. Mrs. Smith starts reading off names, every single person involved in the theft ring. With each name, you can practically hear the air getting sucked out of the room. "You're all fired," she announces, her tone casual like she's telling them the lunch special. "And if you think you're walking out of here without consequences, think again. I've got enough evidence to bury every last one of you, but I'm giving you one chance to come clean. Call it mercy, call it stupidity, I don't care. The door's that way. Use it." The guilty parties scramble to get out like cockroaches when the lights come on. Mrs. Smith watches them go, her expression unreadable. After the room clears out, she looks at the remaining employees. "Now, for those of you who actually give a damn about this company, we're turning the page. We're implementing tighter security, stronger accountability, and zero tolerance for this kind of bullshit." Someone in the back mutters, "Damn, she's not playing." And Mrs. Smith flashes a grin that's all teeth. "You're damn right I'm not. We're not just cleaning houses here, people. We're cleaning up this company from the inside out." As the meeting ends, Marcus catches up with her. "Boss, that was intense. You really think they'll stay gone?" Mrs. Smith raises an eyebrow. "If they're smart, they will. But if they're dumb enough to try anything else, I'll be ready. Nobody steals from me and gets away with it." She looks out over her company, a mix of relief and resolve settling in her gut. It's not just about the money or the reputation. It's about respect. And if there's one thing Mrs. Smith demands, it's respect. As she heads back to her office, she can't help but let out a low chuckle. "Well," she mutters to herself, "and looks like I'm still the best damn cleaner in this place." Because at the end of the day, nobody cleans up a mess like Mrs. Smith. And if you make the mistake of underestimating her, well, that's a mess you won't walk away from.